The Buddha is famously credited for having said that life is suffering. I don't believe he said that. I believe it's much more likely that what he said, or what he intended by what he said, was that life involves inevitable suffering. Not that life is, by its own definition and nature, suffering itself. But there are some who seem to go through life with what I've come to conclude is a kind of a delusion, that everything is always amazing and that everything is simply a decision, a choice. And you're missing the point if you think that there is any suffering or challenge or struggle in life. And I disagree with them. I would call that toxic positivity, a sort of a delusion. And of course, on the other hand, we don't do well at all to feed and nurture and fuel the suffering that we encounter by feeding it and making it worse, losing ourselves in it, letting it overpower us, or allow ourselves to be swept away by it. But the point is that life is a constant blend of what we would call positive and negative, joy and pain, suffering and bliss, and a whole lot of just sort of mediocre, average, more or less doing okay in the middle. But I think that it's much more admirable and preferable, at least to me, to deal with someone and engage with someone who is authentic and honest and sincere and true and genuine about this nature of life and that there is suffering in it. And I'm rather put off by those who constantly proclaim that everything is always amazing, because it's not. Again, don't lose ourselves from the suffering. Don't overdo it. Don't make things worse than they are. Don't dread and fall into fear and despair. But acknowledge that life is a blend of these things. And there are many spiritual luminaries throughout history in all traditions that I've come to discover and admire and revere, and in some cases love. And yet, I also don't go too far with my belief that these are people who never experienced any difficulty or suffering in life. They just mastered it from birth and were immune to all of life's trials and all that. I don't believe that. And I don't believe, personally, in the euphemistic imagery and depiction of someone, for example, living high up in a cave in the Himalayas in absolute perpetual bliss at all times, with never a problem with anything and all, no struggle, no trials of any kind. I just don't. My experience of life leads me to suspect that that's bunk. Now, I know that it can be largely and often true in exceptional cases. But for most of humanity, that's not within the realm of expectation. And I just respect someone much more who is honestly and openly acknowledging that they struggle than I am of someone who tries to proclaim the opposite. I mean, look at even the Christ. He anguished, suffered, struggled, wept, mourned, all of these things in his life, and yet he was the Christ, the anointed one, who Christians believe was resurrected and is one of the three elements of a triune God and is absolute divinity incarnate as human. And yet he struggled, wept, he felt, he anguished. And so the one who will openly confess that to me is easier to love than one who proclaims that they've transcended all suffering and etc. In all cases, at all times. I just don't buy it. And the other thing is that I will respect someone who says, I don't know, more than someone who is instinctively compelled to constantly offer a knowledgeable response to every question, as if they know all things and they just need to grab that answer and present it when questioned. We don't know. Most things we actually don't know. We know almost nothing, really. But this inherent arrogance in the very need to know, or the very need to portray one as knowing all things, it's not admirable. I much more greatly appreciate the one who acknowledges their suffering and acknowledges their ignorance. Because that is pure, that is innocent, that is real. It's genuine. And you know, I have a lot of friends who are monks and nuns, priests, a couple of mystics and seers, things like that. Very, very spiritually luminous people. And among them is one who I will reference now as I mention him. It just brings a smile to my face. In the very moment that he's a monk, and the very moment that he was introduced to me, he offered out his hand to shake my hand, and he sort of tilted his head like that, and he said, I struggle. Those were the first words he ever said to me when we were introduced. I immediately loved him, and I hold him precious and dear in my heart still, ever since, and I always will. Because this encounter was with a pure and genuine soul. And his words were, I struggle. It's easy to love him because he is honest, pure, and true.